Thank you very much for your warm introduction, Dr. Points. It is my extraordinary privilege to participate in the Captain Nations Summit this year. I'm so grateful for your hard work in remembering the victims of communism. Just talking about the victims of communist dictatorship and the people who are still being oppressed to this day makes my heart cry. Like the host's introduction of me, I was born in North Korea, one of the most oppressive regimes in the world, and I have lived for 29 years in the Gulag state. While living in North Korea, no one, including myself and my family members, knew what the communist dictators had taken away from us. No one told us the truth, and the voice from outside never reached us. It was because the communist dictators blocked our eyes, ears, and brainwashed us. The most precious thing to us what we lost, and the dictators took away from us, was our freedom and human rights. The 25 million people still living in North Korea could all end their lives without knowing why they have no freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of ownership, and why they are executed by the regime, forced to work, and suffered from extreme hunger. Ironically, the tragedy that my family experienced in North Korea gave us the wisdom to seek freedom and leave the totalitarian regime. In 2013 and 2014, my father was astonished when he realized that Kim Jong-un executed his uncle with the machine gun and purged hundreds of officials. I also lost my friend and a college classmate, and my sister lost her roommate in front of her very eyes. Some were executed and many were sent to political prison camp, which is notorious in the world. Hundreds of government officials were purged, and around 20 members of their families were forced to be imprisoned for life in the camps. The entire country was shocked by the new leader Kim Jong-un's brutality, and my family realized that this was not what we wanted from the leader, and it was not what we envisioned in our lives under communism and socialism. We concluded that there is a fundamental problem with the totalitarian dictatorship we lived in, and we thought about what we could do for our lives, for our families and relatives and friends, and decided to defect to the free world. Before I talk more about the evils of communism today, unfortunately, I have a sad news that I would like to share with you. A few days ago, the South Korean Ministry of Unification released photos and videos of two North Korean fishermen, defectors, who were forcefully repatriated to the North in November 2019. They were tied with ropes and taken blindfolded to the DMZ, demilitarized zone. When they saw North Korean soldiers in front of them, they registered and struggled not to be taken to North Korea side. Eventually, they were dragged by the South Korean government officials and handed over to the North Korean soldiers. The previous South Korean administration claimed that the two defectors were sent back to North Korea because they are brutal criminals who killed 16 people on the boat. Even the former Ministry of Foreign Unification of the same administration testified at the National Assembly hearing that, I quote, "The defectors said they would go back even if they were killed by the regime." In addition, the National Security Advisor of the same administration testified there was no sincerity in their defection and they were murderers. However, the photos and video clearly show that they were scared to death of going back, and no investigation and no legal procedure were conducted into this murder case in North Korea. In the end, the South Korean government notified the North Korean regime of repatriation just 3 days after they entered South Korea. And in 5 days, they were repatriated through the DMZ. According to my internal source, the two young men were reportedly executed in North Korea. I can't help but doubt my eyes and ears how the South Korean government can ignore the law and hide the repatriation of the defectors in a liberal, democratic, law-governed country and hand up those who are not even convicted to the totalitarian regime which killed its people by anti-aircraft machine guns. It makes me so angry that this can happen in the so-called human rights lawyer presidential government, which put forward the slogan of people come first. What makes me even more surprised and angry is that the former the President Moon Jae-in sent a letter to North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un inviting him to the Asian Korea commemorative summit that day when he notified North Korean reputation of those two fishermen defectors. Very terrible and unacceptable act, no different from the forced repatriation of North Korean defectors by the Chinese Communist Party and the Russian government for years was carried out by the South Korean progressive government. It made me cry all day. Looking at the photos and video of the fishermen, I recall the faces of my friend who was executed. The college birds were taken to Polk prison camp, and my sister's roommate were taken by the North Korean agent in the school dormitory, including my other friends' faces that I have never seen since I left North Korea. Countless North Koreans have been victims of these dictators for decades, for 7 decades, and are still living as slaves in today's 21st century. As everyone here agrees, the suffering experienced by the victims of communism on a global scale by totalitarian dictatorship is beyond the description. And the atrocities of dictators still continue. The atrocities of the war that Russian dictator Putin is now committing against the Ukraine citizens should never happen or be tolerated. Putin's invasion of Ukraine recalls the past of Korean Peninsula. Kim Il-sung, the founder of the North Korean prison state, with the full support from the Soviet Union and Chinese Communist Party, started a war in the Korean Peninsula in June 1950, killing more than 3 million people and devastating the Korean Peninsula during the three-year war. Eventually, the Korean Peninsula became the longest divided country for 7 decades, and tragedy occurred in which it separates hundreds of thousands of families in the south and north. There is no if in history, but if communism didn't exist, if the Soviet Union and Chinese Communist Party had not helped North Korea, the North Korean people would have been free to live the same life as us. In fact, we all thought the Cold War was over, and when we saw the collapse of the Soviet Union and the fall of the Berlin Wall. But the Cold War has never stopped. It has only ceased fire like North Korea and South Korea, which have been in a truce for about 7 decades. The war has stopped, but North Korea has yet to abandon its goal of dominating South Korea, building asymmetric forces such as nuclear weapons, missile, and cyber warfare of decades. In addition, China and Russia studied the success of the Western world and sought and developed the ways to infiltrate and counteract the West more effectively using the liberal democratic system. They secured the capital, energy, strengthened the military power, and developed technology. In particular, China prepared for the new Cold War with the West by using various means, such as economic retaliation, while infringing on intellectual property rights and sovereignty and the territory of other nations. Also, they influenced American education system to brainwash the younger generations with communist and socialist ideology that will never work for those who have experienced the Cold War to destroy liberal democratic system. I was shocked at first many Americans have a perception that socialism is good. I couldn't get the idea out of my head that can they feel the same way if they lived through socialism and communism. According to my experience of living in a one-party dictatorship, communism, socialism, totalitarianism for 29 years, socialism and communism are never a system that provides and guarantees the freedom and human rights of their citizens, improves the quality of life of their people. Rather, it is this system that works to limit and control freedom of their citizens by using so-called justice and equality, and to strengthen the power of dictators with armed force and surveillance. In the end, dictators hide their irrationality and lies of their communist ideology and thus create a totalitarian society and run the country with reign of terror for their long-term rule. Therefore, the era of totalitarian dictators' ambition for power and personal desire to kill countless innocent people must end by all means. Freedom is not free. If we don't fight for it, you will lose it eventually. We must fight for our freedom and for the oppressed people living under communism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Arthur. Thank you for this your words.